Okay, this serial for December 2022 is going to be a little bit longer than usual. Lots of photos. But we'll start directly with the first pictures of the month I took, where with some new equipment, a new lens I hadn't tried before, which these are the first shots I've done with it. It's a Leica Summicron 100mm f2.0 for the medium format system from Leica. Used here on an old camera, which is a S006, not very sensitive to low lights, but still, yeah. The optical construction is similar to the Hasselblad 110mm f2.0 lens, except it's got a floating element on the back, I believe. So for those who use this famous portrait lens, it's kind of an equivalent to Leica way. I really loved the first experience I had with it. Obviously, the field of view of medium format, even so it's digital medium format here, which is not that wide. It's not going to give you the same perspective as a full frame or micro four thirds or whatever. It's just physical, and there's a small difference in the sensation when you look at it. And so that's in Geneva, a small test I did with this lens. Then it's a month where I worked a lot with new films. This is a weird film. Congrats to and kudos to the film photography project for getting those weird films out. That's super positive 1.5 ISO black and white film. It's basically a positive black and white film you develop as a usual black and white film, which actually reverses intensity when you overexpose it. So on the left picture, you see the sun. The point of the sun is just gone black. Makes for really interesting things. And the rendering it's a very low ISO film, but the rendering is really nice. As you can see on the next two pictures, it's very detailed. And you can really open full aperture, even with strong lights, natural lights outside. You will get, we don't see it here very well, but you will get weird textures, interesting textures, because in the high contrast zones, you're going to get this kind of reverse intensity effect, giving it some weird grain. But yeah, really neat. I just did one roll. I'm looking forward to use more for certain projects. Really interesting film. And then on the left, that's Kodak Gold 400 film. That's in Reykjavik, using a Minolta CLE rangefinder camera. That's this camera which was a common project with Leica originally. I mean, it's a Minolta project, but it's originated with a common project between those two companies. To me, it's the most reliable exposure system I've ever used on a film camera. Never fails. Anyways, that's a church in the middle of Reykjavik. And on the right, my usual workhorse SL2 body with an old lens, vintage lens, a Samarit 50mm f1.5, basically a ship. But I like that old school rendering. Next two pictures, it's a month where I've experimented with lots of equipment. So that's two pictures taken with a Holga toy lens. It's a 60mm f8.0 lens with no variable diaphragm. It's kind of a weird pinhole, multi-pinhole lens thing with some kind of plastic lens over. I'm not exactly sure what goes inside, but it's originally made for the Canon EF mount. Really gives some interesting results. It's the focus is a pictogram focusing system. The whole lens is plastic based. It's kind of cheap, but it's also cheap to buy and gives some really, as you can see here, interesting results. Same thing for the next two pictures. The rendering's kind of great. I was very surprised. It's definitely not very defined, but of course here I'm using the SL2 body, which has IBIS, so it's very useful here. With f8 as the aperture, the maximal aperture, you will need internal image body stabilization or some kind of stabilization. As you can see on the right, I messed up, but I kind of like the rendering. It's a interesting toy lens. I will come back to it later. Also, lots of Iceland as usual. Here I was testing the Telit R 180mm f3.4 lens from Leica. It's an old lens. It's a classic. It's super precise. Originally developed for military, I believe military reconnaissance, became part of the reflex mount from Leica collection of lenses. Yeah, superb rendering. That's through an airplane window, of course. So some distortion from the airplane window, not the lens, but the lens is great in its rendering. Here again, Iceland, working with the Sumaret vintage lens, the 50mm f1.5. Those cold nights of Reykjavik, kind of dry, lots of wind, waves and boats. The rendering of this lens, I think, very dramatic. I really like using it. It's an old Leica design. Yeah, nice. Here again, I'll be testing a lot of this lens, which is the Lomo Minitar 132mm f2.8 lens. It's made for a Leica M mount, rangefinder coupled, but I've used it on the SL2. I've had lots of fun using it on the SL2, and so testing it on the left, that's basically its rendering. On the right, that's again the Sumaret 50mm f1.5 morning lights in the Reykjavik Bay, which we can see reflected on that ship. This LC-A Minitar 1 Lomo art lens from Lomography. It's an interesting beast. Distorts a lot, lots of vignetting, but it's a 32mm, and actually the ergonomics are pretty cool. And it's a pancake lens. Works great for street photography or for ambiance photography. I really enjoyed it. It was my first real try with it. We'll have some more later. Here on the left, the moon photos, nobody cares. I actually don't care either, but it's always nice when you have a good one. And the moon's per se some kind of, it's a magical celestial object. So using this Telit-R lens, which is super precise, it's nice. IBIS here, the stabilization was useful, but I just put it here because I think it's nice. And on the right, that's the Tjörnin. It's a small lake in the middle of Reykjavik that was frozen. People could walk on it because it's really many centimeters thick. And yeah, I like the rendering of this Telit-R lens. So I practiced a bit here. Then going back to this 50mm 1.5 Sumaret lens, nights in Reykjavik. On the right, you'll recognize maybe this fantastic Icelandic performer, which is DJ Flugvel og Geimskip, in concert at the Kex Hotel, which has a great scene for concerts. Really cool bar, and really cool ambiance, and I think goes well with this kind of lens. I went there, just took maybe 5 pictures, just had my camera in my pocket, and I enjoyed the concert more than just taking pictures. I just took a few pictures because they were wild. Going back to testing this Minitar 1 lens, that's simply a detail from the city, an urban space on the left. And on the right, that's a Reykjavik Art Museum. Not because the art museum per se is interesting, but actually it is. It's an old building, industrial building in the harbor of Reykjavik, which became an art museum, and the lightings are always interesting. It's an interesting industrial space, and yeah, I kind of like that picture. It gives a good idea also of the rendering of this lens in low light. On the left, that's Sumaret 50mm f1.5, this frozen lake. I kind of like the mayhem in this picture. Nothing crazy about those two pictures, but that's part of the month. On the right, LCA Minitar with its weird flaring, circular flaring. But the picture kind of worked with this tourist taking pictures. Then going to different films. Testing a new film for me, the Street Candy ATM 400 film on a Canon MC pocketable camera. That was in London. It's interesting rendering, old school. And yeah, I'm going to use more of this film. I kind of liked it. It reminded me of some old emulsions and really liked it. On the right, same thing, same equipment with a detail of an industrial kitchen, of a kitchen in a restaurant. Those next two pictures. When I take pictures in my film cameras, I often don't finish my films immediately. So these are pictures from Greece from a while back. By the time I finish the film and develop it, well, they pop out. One of the magical aspects of film photography. That's with Kodak Gold 100, and that's using the Leica AFC1 camera. This time I really felt like it's an undervalued camera from Leica. It's pretty big. It's a point and shoot, but pretty big. It's got two focal lenses, 40 and 80, I believe. It's not very wide in aperture, but it works. And those next two pictures again, same equipment. It's got good geometry, even great geometry, and the rendering is great. It looks like a cheap camera, but actually it's not. It's really robust. It feels good, and actually it's one of those cameras I've used it in the past that I feel compelled to reuse. It's actually a really enjoyable experience. The ergonomics are great, so yeah. And those are again in Crete and Heraklion. Some details of my ramblings around. Going back to digital, on the left that's a Reykjavik urban community by night. I found it interesting because you actually see the city airport in the middle top right with those two light lines, but you don't see the geographical contours. You only see the lights, and I kind of like that view of the Reykjavik Peninsula. And on the right, that's a nuclear plant with its vapor and clouds going up. I don't think we're above Germany, but we're somewhere around there, coming back on the continent. Staying in Iceland, going back and forth, that's film. Using this super robust exposition calculating camera, which is the Minolta CLE, using Kodak Gold 400. On the left, it's a Notholsvik bass. It's the terminal bass. We don't see actually the terminal tubs on the left, but there's one round, one circular one that goes into the bay, and you can go. It's a beach, basically in the middle of the city. It's a cool place, mainly locals, but no, actually that makes it even better. And on the right, that's a detail of a house in the Vesturber neighborhood. Again, using before, I didn't say it was Minolta CLE. Here it's digital, testing this Minitar 1 lens with its weird distortion, concavity in the rendering of its geometrical map. On the left, it's a bar in Reykjavik, and on the right, that's Geneva with the reformer wall with Calvin, who's depicted here. Kind of like this picture. Nothing a touristy picture, but it's nice. Again, photography this month was also testing out new things and trying out things, which sometimes fail. In my opinion, these two pictures fail, and I think it's nice to show them. That's using a lens I've had looked for a long time, which is the Pentax 6.7 120mm f3.5 soft lens. So a lens made to be soft between 3.5 and 8, which would become normal in above 8 of aperture, but otherwise would glow in high contrast zones. And that's adapted on a Leica S006 body. So it makes for something weird, but again, I just want to emphasize that trying out things, it's not because you don't succeed with the pictures you take, like here. It's also the experiments you get and the perspective you will have of using this equipment in the future. I definitely found, by doing those pictures, it's a series, I definitely found an idea that I'm going to exploit with this lens. Very weird lens, very specialized. Here, for those who know this film. I'm sure they recognized it. It's very specific in its rendering. It's the Cinestill 800T, made by Cinestill. It's basically a Kodak cinema film without the remjet layer behind, which removes high contrast halos and is meant for anti-static reasons. And they remove this layer before putting it in rolls for 35mm cameras. Lets it be developed also with standard C41 process and not ECN2. So yeah, this really halo effect on highlights, this glow thing, which makes it really characteristic, and it's got a great color rendering. It's a great film, but it's got lots of character. It's going to be hard for people not to recognize what film you're using. Again, these two cameras, this very characteristic rendering of colors. It's precise, it's soft at the same time, very cinematic. That's what it is. And if you haven't tried it, I would highly recommend it. And that was on a Olympus XA, tiny rangefinder camera that I use very often. Very good exposition meter and very good ergonomics. These two pictures, that's with a new film for me. That's on the Minolta CLE, using a Sumerit 50mm f1.5 lens. It's the Agent Shadow Kosmo 400 ISO film. Very old school rendering. With this lens, I think it's a perfect match. Great on this camera. However, using this camera, it's hard to evaluate how resistant the film is. But this camera is so good at having the right exposure. It measures the light going on the film during exposure and stops when it feels it's good, when it counts it as good. So I think I've never missed one exposition with this camera. So yeah, it's a great camera to test films, but not to test its resistance to over and under exposure. Talking about messing up exposures, that's using a Pentax 6.7 camera, so it's medium format with a 55mm f4.0 lens, a classic. It was a strongly underexposed film. The battery was cold. It was very cold in Bern in Switzerland, in central Switzerland. I messed up my technical settings, and actually compensating for this lack of exposition, it reveals all the scratches on the film. And actually, I found the rendering interesting. That's the film. When you look at it in naked eyes, it's basically white. There's almost no detail, but you can really compensate, and that's what you get. Gave me ideas of how to really push films to get a certain specific style. Here, better exposition. Actually, a great camera I'm testing right now. So Leica Z2X. It's one of those point-and-shoot cameras from Leica that many say are priced. At the time, they were saying it was overpriced. Secondhand, they're actually reasonably priced. And the results, for now, I'm starting to test this camera. I really like the ergonomics. I don't like the look of this camera, which is more like early 2000, I guess. I haven't looked at the details yet, but used it. But actually it works great. The exposure is great. The lens is kind of neat. Works, yeah. And that's using a Pan-F Ilford 50 ISO film with the first snows on the Jura Mountains. Yeah, more on this camera later. I'm still testing it under different circumstances, but really nice experience for now. Here on the left, going back to a Minitar 1 lens on an SL2. This really specific rendering in high contrast, very dreamy, lots of vignetting. But yeah, for specific uses, great lens. And on the right, that's the Holga toy lens I was talking about before. That's adapted on a rangefinder camera from Leica. It's f8.0 of maximum aperture, so the pictograms on the lens telling you where to focus is way sufficient. And here, actually, nobody cares because it's a really long exposure. But actually, for this kind of long exposure, I was very surprised of the rendering. And I believe it's because of those multiple small holes. It's like a multiple pinhole lens. and I think it sort of renders weird lines at different times, at different moments because of this, and makes for this weird light painting effect. Very interesting. I'm going to dig deeper in the use of this lens. Really an interesting, very cheap to buy lens made for Canon, but you can adapt it on almost anything. Here, interestingly, for those two pictures, on the left, that's the LC-A Minitar 1 lens, the art lens from Lomography. And on the right, that's taken at the same place, same moment with the original camera where the lens was. And that's a 35mm camera, the LCA Plus, still made by Lomography with Fomapan 400 film inside. Yeah, you definitely can see the character of the lens coming out on both pictures. But also, I think I like to compare those two pictures. Film and digital don't render the same. That's a fact. You can emulate, you can try to post-process to get the same effect, but out of the box, film, it's a different experience. It's a different rendering. Even so, here we're pretty much on the same level with those lenses, which are theoretically the same. Yeah. You get this dreamy effect, this, interesting. To me, it was interesting to show both together. And still testing this camera, the LCA Plus. I'm in full phase of testing it. On the left, that's with this black and white Fomapan 400, same as the one before. And on the right, that's the same camera using Kodak Color Plus 200. The rendering is interesting both in black and white and color. You definitely can find its characteristic coming out. It's got a strong character. Here again on those two pictures on the left, same equipment. Both are color on the same roll of Kodak Color 200 or Kodak Color Plus 200. It's the same film. On the left, that's a long exposure. It's a great camera for street photography. And on the right, I messed up the settings on it because you can go manual. I think that's what I did. Got this really weird rendering, which I'm going to dig a little bit deeper because I kind of liked it. I messed up a few pictures at the end of the roll, but that's what I got. So, yeah, long session this month, going now into 2023. If you have questions or comments, don't hesitate below. And yeah, see you next time.